Welcome to the weekly update. It's October 30th. I'm Robert Barwick. Today I want to discuss two very important subjects. First is the urgent fact that Australia's food bowl could be smashed sooner than you think. And second, how the current bank debate in Australia is all about LaRouche. So first, Australia's food bowl. Members of the Citizens Electoral Council have attended most of the public information meetings held by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority all around the basin in the last couple of weeks, and we'll be attending most of the rest of them. However, this week I was able to participate with other members of the CEC in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's public information meeting held in Melbourne at the Sofitel Hotel. And what became clear from observing the briefing given by the authority is just how close this plan is to being enacted. It is obvious that the Murray-Darling Basin Authority is just purely a rubber stamp, a bureaucratic rubber stamp for a long-standing plan that we've been talking about quite a lot lately and you've seen in our literature. And two, it's very close to completion. The process that it's rubber stamping is very close to completion. Remember what we've said in the past. This is a plan that is all about one thing: depopulating Australia. Not depopulating the Murray-Darling Basin, depopulating the whole country. The Murray-Darling Basin is a food bowl for Australia and a big portion of the world's population. And the forces that have targeted it for a long time are the forces of the elite financier oligarchical networks out of Europe, headed by Prince Philip, who have one goal in mind, which is global depopulation. The specific organisations that are responsible for where we're at with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is the Australian Conservation Foundation, which Prince Philip founded in 1963, and the so-called Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists, which was set up and is funded by the World Wildlife Fund, or the Worldwide Fund for Nature now, which Prince Philip set up in 1960. And remember, this is the guy who said, when I'm reincarnated, I want to return as a deadly virus so I can contribute to solving the problem of overpopulation. In 1994, at the height of global hysteria about overpopulation that was seen at the UN's Cairo conference that year on overpopulation, Barry Jones used his committee on future strategies to do an inquiry into population in Australia, or Australia's carrying capacity, and that committee actually laid the groundwork for the focus on environmental issues when it comes to population, and that focus is all over this plan. The key point about the plan is it is the result of the 2007 Water Act, which Malcolm Turnbull, the Liberal Environment Minister, rammed through the Parliament. The way that act was written, there is no way that the so-called problem of the Murray-Darling Basin can be solved through human ingenuity. For example, you could not solve the problem of the Murray-Darling Basin by building projects like the Clarence River Scheme to divert extra water into the basin under the way this problem is defined. Why? Because water from the Clarence River Scheme would flow into the Darling River. It would flow down the river. It would help irrigators drawing water out of the Darling. It would help irrigators drawing water out of the Murray downstream. But that's not what this bill's about. This bill was based around Australia's obligations under the 1974 International Ramsar Wetlands Agreement, and it defines those areas as having to be restored under the through diversions of water away from irrigation. Those areas are often up the top of little tributary creeks that flow into the Darling and flow into the Murray that extra water into the Darling is not going to flow back to. So that can't be solved that way. There is no choice but to dismantle the dams and other water holding infrastructure that farmers have put in place over the years in order to send that water back to these Ramsar wetlands. Even though some of the bureaucrats briefing us at the Sofitel admitted that of the 106 what they called hydrological indicator sites in the basin. These are the sites that will determine what is a healthy Murray-Darling Basin. These are the wetlands, etc. Of those sites, the authority knows a lot about some of them, but doesn't know anything about others. Yet they are happy to have a guess at what those other sites, even the ones they don't know about, would require in water terms. And all the requirements of all 106 sites adds up to 7,600 gigalitres a year of extra water being taken from irrigation in the basin and diverted to those sites. Well, if that happens, and which is exactly what the Australian Conservation Foundation in particular are demanding happens, if that happens, forget Australia having a population of 22 million people. Right? We will go down to the 6 million people that Tim Flannery has long demanded that we should go down to. Now, the bureaucrats in the authority, even they knew that would be too radical. Even they knew that would be a shot to the head of agriculture in the basin. And so they toned it back to a range of between 3,000 and 4,000 gigalitres a year to be diverted from irrigation. And the way I characterise that compromise is they prefer this to slowly torture the farmers to death in the Murray-Darling Basin rather than shoot them in the head. So that's the way this bill is written. We are in the middle of a public information and so-called consultation process, which is a farce, because the number one thing that jumped out from the briefing at the Sofitel Hotel is that contrary to what most people would assume, that something this significant and this radical would have to be passed by an Act of Parliament at some future stage. It doesn't. The authority to pass it was already passed by Parliament in the Malcolm Turnbull's 2007 Water Act, which all the parties unanimously agreed to, including the National Party, including the Liberal Party, with one exception, and that was independent member for Windsor, New England, Tony Windsor, was the only member of Parliament who expressed opposition to this. So this was unanimously put through, and under that authority, this plan will be enacted by the approval of the Minister. That's all it requires. Tony Burke, the Minister for Sustainable Population, only has to approve this plan and it's enacted. Now, remember, he is the Minister for Population. That is not a coincidence. The Office of Minister for Population was created this year by the Rudd government, but the creation of that office fulfilled the demand of the 1994 Barry-Jones Committee into Australia's population carrying capacity. That committee said we need a Minister for Population specifically, and that office was created earlier this year. And then when the Fabian Society's Julia Gillard became Prime Minister, she very deliberately changed the title of that ministership from Minister for Population to Minister for Sustainable Population. Now, of course, when they say sustainable, what they mean is lower sustainability. They don't mean create a situation where we can sustain more. They mean create a situation where we can sustain less. And Tony Burke is that Minister for lower sustainability depopulation. Don't be fooled.